I arrived at Trenton and Avery Media 5 years ago with a crisp suit, a head full of ideas, and a heart determined to prove that strategy could reshape the way brands spoke to their audiences. In the beginning, I was the new hire eager to learn the ropes, the junior strategist staying late each night to absorb every nuance of consumer psychology and media planning. I watched from the sidelines as Talia Avery, the longtime strategy director and my future mother-in-law, commanded meetings with measured confidence, her voice carrying the weight of experience and the respect of everyone in the room. Over time, I transformed from that wide-eyed newcomer into the strategist everyone leaned on. I led the viral social campaign that boosted our flagship clients' engagement by 30%. I devised the cross-platform content strategy that outperformed every competitor, and I navigated crises so deftly that CEO Graham Avery bragged about my calm under pressure at every board meeting. I did all of this while managing the delicate dance of being married to Claire, Talia's daughter, whose presence in every office gathering felt like a constant reminder that my professional victories were under the brightest, most judgmental spotlight imaginable. I charted my progress meticulously. I filled notebooks with campaign metrics, drafted slide decks that synthesized data into narratives, and prepared for every quarterly review as though it were a make-or-break performance. I believed, as everyone around me seemed to believe, that when Talia retired next spring, the strategy director role, that coveted position at the heart of Trenton and Avery's decision-making engine, would be mine. I pictured the office with my nameplate on the door, the plush leather chair behind the conference table, the implicit promise that my loyalty and hard work had earned me more than a title, they had earned me legacy. Even Talia, with her gentle smile and soft encouragement, told me I deserved it. She joked that she would put in a good word with her father. Claire whispered late at night that she could already see me in that role, shaping the company's future with the same steady hand that had guided every major initiative for half a decade. So I prepared. I refined the 5-year strategic roadmap I had drafted long ago, aligning it with the new market trends and corporate objectives that Graham had laid out at last quarter's shareholder meeting. I rehearsed my presentation bit by bit, memorizing every statistic and every projection until they felt like extensions of my own voice. Each weekend found me at my desk instead of dining out with Claire. Every evening, I lingered in the office until Talia and the senior team had cleared the building, late enough that the hum of fluorescent lights and the echo of my own footsteps became the backdrop to my ambition. I cut short vacations, skipped social events, and politely declined family gatherings, all in service to ensuring that on the day of the promotion meeting, I would stand before the board with an unassailable case for why the next strategy director had to be me. That morning, I buttoned my jacket in front of the mirror, straightened my tie, and breathed deeply. Claire kissed my cheek and wished me luck, though the tremor in her eyes told me she shared my anxiety as much as she shared my hope. In the elevator, I felt the weight of every expectation, my own, Talia's, Claire's, and yes, even Graham's unspoken confidence in me. The conference room smelled faintly of fresh coffee and polished wood. I could see the board members filing in, take-one copies of my slide deck neatly stacked in front of them. I felt a thrill of anticipation, that electric jolt that comes just before the start of something you believe will define you. Graham Avery sat at the head of the table with his signature calm. Beside him sat Talia, whose presence felt both reassuring and bittersweet. Across from me was Claire, her fingers drumming lightly on the table as she watched my every move. When Graham cleared his throat, the room hushed, and I pressed the remote in my hand, ready to launch the first slide. Words formed behind my eyes, data points, charts, timelines, everything I needed to convince them that I had earned their trust, their investment, their vote. But before I could speak, Graham shifted forward and smiled in a way I had never seen him smile for me. "Thank you all for your hard work," he began, voice measured but warm. My heart pounded. "Talia has served us brilliantly for 30 years, and we owe her a debt of gratitude." Talia smiled familiarly. I braced for the segue. When Talia announced her retirement last month, I challenged all of you to consider who among us could carry forward her remarkable legacy. I held my breath. My hand tightened on the remote. "Today," he continued, "I'm pleased to announce that Bryce Larkin will be our new strategy director." A murmur rippled through the room. "Bryce?" My colleague, with a careless laugh and a record of underwhelming performance, looked across the table at me, his grin smug, triumphant. Claire burst into polite applause, her hands unfamiliar on her lap. Talia's smile faltered but remained gracious. I felt as though the floor had dropped out beneath me. I froze. The remote clicked in my hand but did nothing. My throat constricted. The carefully prepared slides were irrelevant now, buried beneath the weight of Graham's words. In that moment, surrounded by polite claps and congratulatory nods for Bryce, I realized that my years of loyalty had been overlooked, my late nights ignored, my strategic victories dismissed. The candidate they already chose was not the one who earned it, but the one who fit the story Graham wanted to tell. And as Bryce rose from his seat, basking in the approval of the founder's circle, I sat motionless, the echo of my own silence louder than any argument I could have made. I watched Bryce Larkin from across the open-plan office, tracing the faint curve of his smug grin as he leaned back in his chair, feet propped on the edge of a mahogany conference table that I had polished for him when I fetched coffees. He was everything I was not, lazy in his approach, sly in his delivery, and endlessly boastful about connections he hadn't earned. He breezed through corridors with his sleeves casually rolled up, engaging in half-hearted banter with the junior staff who mistook familiarity for competence. Their laughter followed him like an applause track, and I felt a hollow ache in my chest each time I caught the way clients brightened when he entered a meeting. In those hallways, I had once led teams, crafted strategies, and nurtured relationships that drove revenue. Yet Bryce, with his inherited status as part of the family, slipped effortlessly into every role I had painstakingly built. I remembered the way I had discovered his pattern, the slide decks I designed suddenly showing up in his presentations with his name on the cover, the metrics I chased and refined published under his byline, the media buys I negotiated with networks credited to his negotiation skills. At first, I chalked it up to casual oversight, until I found my carefully annotated spreadsheets renamed, reformatted, and forwarded by his email address. When I confronted him in the break room, he shrugged with that insufferable grin and said, "You know I'm part of the family. Mom says you don't mind sharing, right?" I stared at him, spoon poised over my coffee mug, taste gone sour. His casual takeover of my work felt like a slow bleed. When I tried to ignore in the hope that Graham would intervene, that Talia would call him out. Instead, Graham patted Bryce's shoulder and called him leadership material, as though the lessons of my presentations were merely footnotes to his natural flair. Each evening, I remained in the office long after the bustle had quieted, my desk buried beneath emails I had drafted and proposals I had championed. I triaged his forwarded messages and corrected errors he refused to acknowledge, believing that if I kept delivering excellence, Graham would see the value I brought. But every compliment at board meetings was redirected toward Bryce's supposed initiative, every client accolade recited in the corridors as though he had single-handedly driven success. My office chair grew cold, and the fluorescent lights above my head turned dull from overuse, yet I persevered. I reminded myself that resilience was part of strategic success, that patience in the face of injustice would eventually yield recognition. I told myself that Graham's oversight was merely a temporary lapse, that one day the truth would outshine nepotism. Still, doubt gnawed at me. I caught my reflection in the glass conference room walls on late nights, the fringe of my hair damp with sweat, my shirt sleeves rolled up in solidarity with the grind I endured. I thought of the countless hours I invested, weekends lost to market research, birthdays eclipsed by deadline-driven emails, holidays shadowed by urgent campaign tweaks. Bryce, on the other hand, had told his fiancée Claire that he had crafted the Edelman pitch I spent 3 weeks perfecting, and she had nodded enthusiastically, her eyes full of pride for the man she called her partner. I felt a twist in my gut when I overheard her recount the story at brunch with her friends, her laughter ringing in my ears like a cruel bell. I wanted to stand up and declare that campaign was mine, but the words stuck in my throat, swallowed by the fear that in doing so, I would expose my vulnerability and jeopardize the last shreds of goodwill I had. The worst night came when Bryce swaggered into the client-facing meeting I had organized halfway through my presentation and casually took the floor. He glanced at my slides, nodded as if absorbing them in an instant, and then began to reframe the entire pitch with offhand anecdotes and an air of improvisation. The client leaned forward, eyes alight, as he peppered questions at Bryce, questions I had anticipated and rehearsed. But Bryce answered with ease, deflecting to his family pedigree instead of acknowledging the months of groundwork I laid. I sat at the head of the table, hands clasped in my lap, as they complimented his insightful leadership, oblivious to the small print of my contributions that lay hidden in the footnotes. When the meeting adjourned, Bryce swept past me with a firm clap on the back and congratulated me for setting the scene so well, as though my role was nothing more than stage dressing for his star turn. I forced a smile, but inside I burned. That evening, I walked the long route home alone, tracing my steps through lit streets that felt colder than the office after hours. The city's hum reduced to distant sirens and the occasional honk of a cab. I replayed every slight, every stolen idea, every stolen moment of credit that Bryce claimed as his own. I felt small in the aggregate of my accomplishments, as though they were artifacts buried beneath his nepotistic shadow. My loyalty, once a badge of honor, felt like a noose tightening around my neck. And yet, as I passed the rows of shuttered shops and silent sidewalks, I realized that my loyalty had always been to my own ambition, to the fire that drove me to strategize, to create, to excel. Bryce's ill-gotten accolades did not define my worth. My work did. The next morning, I arrived at Trenton and Avery Media before sunrise. The lobby was dark, and the security guard greeted me with a nod. I carried a folder thick with evidence. Emails timestamped and forwarded, project briefs with my initials in the margins, credit sheets from clients acknowledging my contributions. I felt the weight of it in my hand, heavy with the promise of confrontation. I reminded myself that I had earned the right to challenge the narrative and reclaim my work. I stepped through the revolving doors with my shoulders squared, ready to bring my shadow self into the light. And to demand that Bryce Larkin's reign as family favorite no longer dimmed the brilliance of my accomplishments. I took my seat at the long mahogany table beneath the chandelier that cast warm light like a halo over the polished surface, every place setting meticulously arranged with gleaming silverware and fine china. And I felt the weight of expectation settle on my shoulders like a lead mantle. The evening had been billed as a celebration of family milestones. A milestone, perhaps, for Bryce's ascension or for Claire's father reclaiming his legacy. And yet, as I watched Bryce across the table, regaling Graham with a half-baked anecdote about a client crisis he'd navigated, I realized this dinner was something darker, a performance in which I was nothing more than a prop. Claire sat beside him, wearing a pale blue dress that shimmered under the chandelier's glow, her fingers drumming lightly on the tablecloth, her eyes fixed on her father with all the pride of an audience watching a silver-tongued actor. I sat on the other side, feeling as though I'd been moved off stage without warning, relegated to the audience even in my own home. The first course arrived in silent procession. A delicate consommé that steamed gently in porcelain bowls, the aroma of saffron and roasted vegetables rising in gentle swirls. Bryce leaned forward to sip from his spoon, feigning surprise at the flavors, as though he'd been personally involved in sourcing the ingredients. I watched Talia across the table, her posture impeccable, her smile tight. She exchanged a knowing glance with Graham, a glance that said everything she wouldn't speak aloud. Claire's mother, Eleanor, nodded approvingly at Bryce's commentary on culinary nuance, as though his words were as carefully curated as his family ties. I lifted my spoon and tasted the broth, recognizing the subtle balance of flavors I had once helped test with the office catering team before a major client pitch, and felt a flash of bitter irony. Everything in this room, the lighting, the service, the conversation, had been arranged for Bryce's victory lap, and I was forced to trace every memory of my own contributions as though they were belonging to someone else. When the main course arrived, seared scallops atop a bed of pea puree, garnished with microgreens, Bryce regaled us with another tale, this one about how he'd mentored an intern on social media strategy. He described the buzz they'd generated around a recent campaign as though he'd sat at that intern's side through every brainstorming session, every content calendar update. I remember drafting those calendars myself, late into the night, after reviewing endless analytics reports from our digital team. I felt the heat rise to my cheeks as Claire laughed at Bryce's punchline, her laughter light and musical, but tinged with relief that the spotlight had shifted. I remembered the countless family dinners I'd endured, waiting for my moment to speak, only to have my ideas brushed aside in favor of Bryce's half-formed summaries. And tonight, in the flickering candlelight, I felt those slights accumulate like shards of glass in my chest. I needed to speak. I rehearsed my words silently, weaving together the months I had spent on these strategies, the late nights, the weekends sacrificed, the metrics I had analyzed until they bled into my dreams. I imagined standing and clearing my throat, recounting every detail of my work and pointing out every instance in which Bryce had claimed credit for my labor. I imagined the hush that would fall over the table, the shock on Claire's face, the shame in Graham's eyes as the truth spilled out. But when I opened my mouth, all I managed was a tight smile and a nod. The words lodged in my throat, my voice caught in the knot of disbelief that I'd been so thoroughly sidelined. After the main course, the plates were cleared and replaced with a platter of petite chocolate tarts and fresh berries. The room grew quiet as everyone savored the sweetness, and across from me, Bryce leaned in toward Claire and whispered something that made her shoulders relax and her lips curve into a smile I didn't recognize. A conspiratorial smile shared between two people who had chosen to ignore the injustice that sat between us. I picked up a tart and tasted the dark chocolate's bitterness tempered by fresh strawberry juice, and I imagined biting into the bitterness of this entire charade instead of these truffles. I recalled the first dinner I attended with Claire's family, the nervous excitement that had filled me as I hoped to prove myself worthy of their trust and affection. And I realized that dinner, like this one, had been nothing but a stage, with me always playing a role I never quite mastered. I glanced at Talia, my mentor, my mother-in-law, the woman whose endorsement I had coveted, whose guidance I had sought at every turn. She sat with her back straight, her hands folded in her lap, observing Bryce's triumph with a gentle but inscrutable expression. Was there regret in her eyes? Compassion? I could not tell. The warmth of the candlelight softened her features, but her gaze remained fixed on Bryce, as though she saw in him the future of the company she had built, while I, the architect of her most successful campaigns, was already a relic of her past. I felt the pressure of her unspoken judgment press down on me. You should have known your place, she seemed to say. When the dinner concluded, Graham raised his glass for a toast. He spoke of family, legacy, and the dawn of a new era under Bryce's stewardship. Claire raised her glass as though pledging her allegiance to a monarch, while I held mine with trembling fingers, the crystal cool against my palm. I listened to the clink of glasses and the chorus of applause, the words of triumph washing over me like a wave that threatened to drag me under. I saw the client representatives nod respectfully at Bryce's name, as though they believed his performance was the sum total of our shared success. And in that moment, seated beside the woman I loved, I realized that my marriage had become as performative as my career, a performance in which my presence was required, my acquiescence assumed, and my sacrifice rewarded only with invisibility. After the toast, I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor with a harsh note that cut through the polite murmur. Claire looked up in surprise, Bryce frowned, and Graham's smile faltered. Without a word, I left my half-finished tart on the plate and walked toward the door, the murmured apologies and startled gasps trailing behind me like spectral hands trying to pull me back. I crossed the threshold into the hallway, a hallway I had walked countless times in confidence and hope, and felt the cold air greet me with unexpected clarity. I understood then that this dinner had not only ended a celebration but had ended something far deeper, my belief that loyalty alone would sustain me in a world built on privilege. And as I stepped into the night, the door clicking softly behind me, I knew that the next chapter of my life would have to be written outside these walls, beyond the half-lit halls of Trenton and Avery Media, where my worth would no longer be measured by someone else's performance of family pride. I sat in my small apartment, surrounded by the half-empty boxes I had packed in a daze, clutching my laptop like a lifeline. The glow of the screen illuminated the dark circles under my eyes, each line a testament to nights spent wrestling with invoices and contracts while Bryce basked in the accolades he didn't earn. The silence felt both comforting and suffocating, comforting because I no longer had to endure the hollow echo of false praise, suffocating because I realized how deeply I had let myself be erased. I opened my email and began to sift through the digital archive of my life at Trenton and Avery. Campaign briefs, client testimonials, internal memos, and strategy outlines. Each document bore my name, my insights, and my late-night revisions. Yet everywhere I looked, the tangible markers of my effort had been repackaged under Bryce's authorship. I remembered the conversation that had ignited this investigation. It was a Tuesday morning, just after dawn, when I received a terse message from Avery and Sons Foods, the client whose multi-million-dollar account I had rescued 6 months earlier. Your colleague Bryce presented our quarterly report without crediting your contributions, the note read. We'd like an explanation. I stared at those words, the weight of them pressing down like a stone in my chest. For years, I had been invisible. But to have a client finally see through the facade was both exhilarating and terrifying. I closed my eyes and recalled every email I had sent to Bryce, offering him drafts of the slides, politely reminding him to include my name in the footnotes. His replies were curt acknowledgments. Thanks, got it, but no effort to rectify his omissions. That afternoon, I met Brandon at the coffee shop on 5th and Elm, my lawyer friend whose calm reasoning I trusted more than anyone's praise. I slid into the booth across from him, my suit jacket hanging limply at my sides. He raised an eyebrow at my disheveled appearance. Burning the midnight oil again, he asked, voice gentle. I shook my head. Something's gone too far, I said, sliding a printed stack of emails across the table. Brandon flipped through them, his brow furrowing as he traced the timeline. My draft said 11:03 p.m., my suggestions at 2:45 a.m., Bryce's forwarding at 8:15 a.m. the next day with his name in the sender's field. The pattern was inescapable. He looked up and met my gaze. You have a strong case, he said, but you need more than client complaints. You need internal documentation, timestamps, revisions, meeting notes, that prove you own this work from concept to execution. I nodded, steeling myself for the task. For the next hour, we outlined a plan. I would request access to archived project folders from IT, compile timestamps from version histories, and print out meeting minutes that cited my attendance and contributions. Brandon promised to draft a succinct cover letter explaining the legal implications of misattributed work, which I could address to Graham and the board. That evening, I returned home and set up my laptop on the dining table, transforming the space into a makeshift war room. I opened the company's shared drive and navigated to the strategy department folder. There it was, the campaign subfolder labeled Nutricor_relaunch_Q4. I right-clicked on the document, strategy_document_v3_final.docs, and selected version history. The list of revisions displayed before me like footprints in the sand. Each date, each minute, each change unmistakably mine. I exported the list to a PDF and saved it in a new folder titled Evidence. My heart hammered in my chest as I worked through folder after folder. Emerald Tech, Avery Foods, Greenleaf Campaign, all of them littered with my fingerprints, while a solitary email in each thread showed Bryce's final signature. I paused when I stumbled upon our internal Slack channel, where Bryce had once posted, "Great work on the pitch deck, team," tagging me under a message that read, "Special thanks to me for pulling this together." I screenshotted it. I found a voice memo in our project management system labeled Client Feedback, where a representative gushed, "Honestly, I'd never have expected a pitch this detailed. It must have taken them all night. Whoever drafted those notes really understands our brand." The audio file contained my name. Another screenshot. By midnight, my evidence folder brimmed with digital proof. I leaned back in my chair, exhausted but exhilarated. For the first time in years, I felt the surge of ownership over my own achievements again. I drafted a cover letter addressed to Graham, Talia, and the board, outlining the misattributions and attached receipts. I kept the tone measured. I stated the facts, I referenced the company's code of conduct, and I expressed my hope that we could resolve this internally. I copied Brandon's succinct legal paragraph at the end, a calm assertion of my rights to intellectual property. I BCC'd the board, the COO, and HR, everyone who needed to see it simultaneously. I hit send at 12:17 a.m. The whoosh of the outgoing email sounded like a thunderclap in the silent apartment. I closed my laptop and leaned forward, hands trembling. This was the moment of truth. I had armed myself with evidence, confronted injustice with documentation, and risked everything on the possibility that the system would actually correct itself. I half expected the walls to cave in, the phone to ring with curses from Graham, or my company email to be locked out immediately. Instead, I heard only the hum of the refrigerator and the distant rumble of late-night traffic. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual, steeling myself for the fallout. The security guard nodded as I walked in with my briefcase and a resolve stronger than any I had felt in years. I watched the inbox on my phone. No new messages yet. Around me, junior staff greeted each other, oblivious to the storm brewing behind the glass walls of the boardroom. I made my way past Bryce's empty desk. He must have already started his morning rituals, and paused at my own. I sat down, took a deep breath, and opened my laptop. The first email I saw was from Noel in HR. Subject line, Evidence presentation. It read, "Thank you for your detailed submission. We will review this with the board and respond by end of day." I exhaled so forcefully that the air whooshed through my lips. Relief washed over me in a wave as I realized that for the first time, I was no longer a bystander in my own career. I had removed the mask that had hidden my labor and placed it squarely on the table for everyone to see. I smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that reached my eyes for the first time in months. As I sipped my coffee, I felt a new kind of excitement take hold. The anticipation of justice served, of recognition reclaimed, and the knowledge that I had finally become the man behind the mask. The morning of the pitch presentation arrived with a brittle tension that settled in the back of my neck like a hunter's anticipation of the kill. I stepped into the boardroom carrying nothing but my meticulously prepared slides and the conviction that this moment belonged to me. The conference table gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and I placed my laptop at the head, aligning the projector screen so that every detail of my work would appear crystal clear. Around the table sat the major players: Graham, with his steely gaze; Talia, whose expression was gentle but unreadable; the COO, arms folded; the CFO, tapping his pen; and the client representatives from Horizon Tech. Executives whose names I had memorized and whose expectations I understood down to the smallest nuance. I felt the gravity of their attention directed toward me, and despite the weeks of planning and rehearsals, my heart thudded as though it were still racing through corridors of doubt. I began by briefly revisiting the challenge Horizon Tech faced: a saturated market, shifting consumer behaviors, and a brand identity that had grown stale against nimble competitors. My voice was steady, each sentence a deliberate bridge between their pain points and the solutions I had crafted. I unveiled the first slide, a dynamic timeline of consumer engagement trends dotted with milestones marking the pivotal campaigns I had launched for other clients. The board members leaned forward. I recognized that silent lean is the telltale sign of genuine interest. My narrative flowed into a breakdown of 3 strategic pillars: innovation through storytelling, data-driven touchpoints, and community cultivation, each pillar illustrated with case studies, performance metrics, and a clear roadmap. I had rehearsed these connections until they were as natural as breathing, and when I spoke, I felt the room respond to the logic of my argument rather than any inherited privilege. Halfway through, I heard the soft click of Bryce's arrival. He slipped into the room behind me, nodding to a few acquaintances, unaware that I was already at the heart of the story I had written. I acknowledged his presence with a curt, professional nod, but refused to let his aura distract me. The room's energy pulsed around his confidence, but I channeled that energy into reinforcing every point, every projection, every line on my graphs. When I transitioned to the deep dive on budget allocation and media channel optimization, I sensed the CFO's interest shift to approval. I walked them through the cost per engagement comparisons I had negotiated, the projected ROI over 6 months, and the mechanisms for ongoing performance analysis. At each step, I paused and invited questions, anticipating objections and answering them with empirical clarity. The rhythm of the presentation became a conversation. Details exchanged, insights explored, each interaction reaffirming that this proposal was mine in every respect. Then, nearly at the conclusion, Bryce rose from his seat and cleared his throat. He walked to the head of the table, inserted himself between me and the projector, and began to summarize my points in casual language. He spoke of our collective vision and the brilliant thinking that brought this strategy to life, his words a smokescreen that attempted to conflate my authorship with his presence. The client representatives exchanged glances, their eyebrows lifting in recognition of his familiarity rather than mine. For a moment, panic flashed through me. If I let him dominate the closing, all my work would drift into his narrative. But as I watched his confident posture, I saw also the gaps. The hesitation when he touched on the data models, the bumpy transitions between slides he never rehearsed, the absence of the strategic context that only I could articulate. So I stood, tapped the remote, and let the final slide glow behind us, a projection of the campaign's first 6 months, complete with phased milestones, KPIs, and a visual timeline showing the steps we would take together. Before we wrap up, I said, and the room fell silent again, I'd like to address the specifics of execution and measurement because these are the levers that will ensure Horizon Tech not only meets but surpasses its goals. I spoke directly to the client's marketing director, outlining the cadence of bi-weekly check-ins, the real-time dashboard access I had built into the plan, and the contingency models designed to pivot as market conditions evolved. Each sentence reaffirmed that this proposal was grounded in my careful analysis and hands-on refinement. I concluded by saying, this strategy is more than a presentation. It's a partnership built on precision, creativity, and accountability. My team and I are committed to seeing it through every stage. A hush followed. The client rep leaned back, eyes bright, and said, I won't lie. I've sat through dozens of pitches this quarter, but this level of detail, this direct line to execution, it's exactly what we need. Another exec nodded and added, Tell me you're going to lead this. I felt warmth rise in my chest. The words I had longed to hear, spoken without prompting or redirection. Graham's smile arrived then, subtle but unmistakable, and he turned to Bryce. Bryce looked back, blinking as though waking from a spell, and only then did it register that the heat of approval had shifted entirely to me. The COO stood, applauding, followed by Talia, her expression softening with pride as she approached to shake my hand. After the meeting, the client representatives filed out, exchanging handshakes and firm compliments. I gathered my laptop, steadying myself as the room emptied. Bryce approached, confusion and resignation crossing his face. That was really good, he managed, voice small. I offered a terse nod. He knew. I knew. All the credit he had claimed evaporated in those final moments of clarity. I packed my materials and walked past Graham, who stopped me at the door. Well done, he said quietly, his hand gripping my shoulder. I looked into his eyes, searching for the old restraint of favoritism, but found only genuine respect. I stepped out into the bright hallway, the buzz of the building's midday energy greeting me like a new dawn. Colleagues offered congratulatory smiles, and I returned each with the steady grace of someone who had reclaimed his place. In my office, I closed the door and allowed myself a moment of solitude, reflecting on the journey from unseen strategist to undeniable authority. The letter, the evidence, the confrontation. All had led to this moment where my work spoke louder than any inherited title. And as I stood by the window overlooking the city skyline, I felt a surge of calm confidence. I had presented my truth, I had led with clarity, and I had secured the validation I never needed from anyone but myself. The last presentation had been mine, in every slide, every word, every insight, and in its wake, I realized I no longer sought approval. I had found something far more powerful. Proof that my value was unwavering, uncompromised, and entirely my own. I woke before dawn with a tight knot in my chest, the adrenaline of yesterday's victory already cooling to an ache of anticipation for what I had to do next. The apartment felt foreign, as though I were a guest in my own life, surrounded by moving boxes and the residue of late-night strategy sessions I no longer believed in. I made coffee without tasting it, eyes fixed on the blank page of a letter I had stared at for hours the night before, cursor blinking like an impatient clock. I slid a sheet of heavy, ivory stationery into the printer tray and watched the machine work with deliberate slowness, as if reluctant to give form to my departure. When the printer spat out the final copy, crisp edges, the letters neatly aligned. I took a breath that filled my lungs and let it go, feeling the gravity of the moment press down. This was not an act of anger, nor a reckless gamble. It was the culmination of every slight I had endured, every stolen credit I had reclaimed. I placed the first version into an envelope meant for human resources. Resignation. My name, Strategy Department, effective immediately. It felt clinical, sanitized, a document meant for corporate archives rather than human hearts. The second envelope I prepared with trembling hands, addressed to Graham Avery, founder and chairman, Trenton and Avery Media. I wrote his name in my neatest hand, careful to avoid any flourish that might betray my emotion. Inside, I tucked the copy of the letter whose final paragraph spelled out every project I led, every campaign I rescued, and every client testimonial that acknowledged my contributions. I included side-by-side comparisons of Bryce's presentations with my original drafts, annotated emails with timestamped revisions, and quotes from the clients whose meetings I had saved. I BCC'd the board of directors, the COO, and legal counsel to a blind copy of the email that would accompany these envelopes, so that no one could claim ignorance of the evidence. With envelopes sealed, I walked through my apartment, pausing at the rental agreement I had framed on the wall. Proof that I had built this life on my own terms, not on a family name. I gathered my personal items, a framed photograph of Claire and me on our wedding day, a set of carefully curated coffee mugs from client appreciation gifts, the stack of notebooks where I had sketched every campaign concept in midnight ink. I placed them in a leather satchel that had once symbolized my dedication to this company, now repurposed to carry the fragments of my past. Each item felt weighty in my hands, as though infused with the sweat and tears of too many unacknowledged hours. I hesitated at the doorframe, looking back at the empty room. It felt both like a prison I was finally leaving and a sanctuary I would soon miss. My phone buzzed with a message from Claire. "What are you doing?" 3 simple words that pulled me back to the intimacy we once shared. I stared at the screen, my finger hovering over the reply field. In another life, I might have crafted the perfect explanation, weaving reassurance into each sentence. But in this moment, I felt the final barrier between my professional and personal life collapse. I no longer wanted to explain myself to someone who had remained silent when I needed her voice most. I let the message sit, unread by me until after I walked out the door. I knew she would call, then text again, then have her mother send a carrier pigeon if she could. And yet, I embraced the absence of obligation, the space between expectations and my own truth. I arrived at the office under a sky still washed in the pale glow of morning, the parking lot nearly empty except for a lone car that must have belonged to someone equally committed or equally desperate. I carried the HR envelope in one hand and the Graham envelope in the other, each weight a testament to the steps I had taken. The lobby felt quieter than usual, the receptionist surprised to see me so early. I told her I needed to drop off some documents and asked if she could please forward them to the appropriate desks. She regarded me with a puzzled look but nodded, her pen poised over a visitor log. I signed in with my name and the note, "Document delivery," my signature firmer than I expected. Moments later, I found myself standing outside Graham's office door, the brass nameplate gleaming. I hesitated only briefly before slipping the envelope under the door. No knock, no announcement, just a whisper of paper against the carpeted floor. My heart thundered as I turned away, imagining him picking it up, feeling its weight, flipping it open to discover that every hidden truth had been placed before him. I walked down the hallway with measured steps, every click of my shoes echoing like a drumbeat of finality. Before I reached the elevator bank, the weight in my chest began to ease, replaced by an unfamiliar lightness. I pushed the elevator button and watched the doors close on the floor where I had sacrificed so much of myself. When I reached the curb, the world felt strange and wide, as though someone had opened a door in my mind and let in fresh air for the first time in years. The cool breeze brushed against my cheeks, and I closed my eyes, savoring the moment when I realized that I was no longer bound by other people's choices. With my resignation letter delivered, I had reclaimed my agency. I would build something new, an agency grounded in integrity, excellence, and the promise that no one would ever write me out of my own story again. As the city stirred around me, I lifted my chin and stepped forward into the dawn of my next chapter, the envelope's echo still humming in the quiet of my exit. I pushed open Graham Avery's office door with a resolve born from months of silence and too many stolen moments of credit, the envelope sealed in my hand like a trigger ready to fire. The morning light spilled across his polished desk, illuminating the half-empty decanter of scotch and the neat stack of quarterly reports that no longer held any power over me. Graham looked up, eyebrows arching in mild surprise as if he had expected only the routine. Another project update, another spiel about results, another pitch for the next campaign. Instead, I stood there with the weight of every unacknowledged hour, every credit misattributed, and every silent plea for recognition bundled into a single moment of confrontation. I felt my pulse hammering against my temples, an urgent drumbeat that demanded to be heard, even if my voice threatened to falter under its own intensity. I placed the first envelope across the corner of his desk, the HR label catching the light as if to announce its significance. "I'm resigning," I said, my voice calm and measured despite the tempest inside me. Graham's gaze flicked between my face and the envelope, his expression unreadable for a heartbeat. Then, with a casual flick of his wrist, he waved toward the HR envelope and said, "Over a promotion? Grow up." His words landed like a slap, an attempt to diminish the gravity of my actions, to reduce my departure to petty disappointment over a job title. But instead of retreating, I slid the second envelope into view, the one addressed to him personally, and watched as his smirk faltered into a puzzled frown. "This one's for you," I added, my tone even but carrying an undercurrent of steel. "Open it." He stared at the envelope as though it were some curious trinket, twisting it between his fingers before tearing it open with the precision of a man accustomed to getting exactly what he wants. I leaned against the edge of his desk, arms crossed, watching every micro-expression as he withdrew the crisply folded resignation letter and the meticulously organized evidence. His eyes skimmed the first few lines, my years of service, my achievements, the projects I had led single-handedly, before darting to the attachments, side-by-side comparisons that laid bare the emails, the timestamps, the client testimonials that bore my name. I saw the shift in his posture, the slow realization that the mask he had worn to protect Bryce's privilege had been peeled away, revealing the mechanics of an injustice he had chosen to ignore. The office, once a fortress of familial authority, seemed to shrink around him as he absorbed the implications of what I had delivered. For several beats of uneasy silence, Graham's mouth worked as though searching for a retort, but no words escaped. Instead, he flipped through the pages more methodically, his gaze traveling down columns of data and footnotes, pausing at client quotes that praised my strategic mind and executional rigor. I watched the lines between his brows deepen into furrows of shock and something like guilt. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, stripped of its customary arrogance. "Is this a joke?" he asked, the question hanging in the air as though he feared the answer. I met his eyes and pressed him with a quiet certainty. "You made your choice," I replied, the words deliberate, weighted with every moment I had spent gathering this proof. "You chose to reward nepotism over merit. Now I choose myself over this charade." Graham closed the folder with a sharp snap, as though the act itself might sever the evidence from reality, but he could not erase the truth I had laid bare. He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under the strain of his shifting emotions, and stared at me with a mixture of regret and calculation. I felt no gloating pleasure in his discomfort. Instead, I felt a profound release, as though I had broken free from chains I hadn't fully known were binding me. I folded my arms and let the silence stretch, giving him the space to confront the consequences of his own choices. Finally, he exhaled, the sound a brittle whisper of concession, and said, "You're right. I did make a choice." I inclined my head, acknowledging his admission without a hint of triumph. As I turned to leave, I felt the door frame under my fingers, the solid wood a reminder that I was stepping from one realm of my life into another entirely. Behind me, Graham's voice called out, tentative, uncertain, "Wait." I paused but did not turn. I did not need his reconsideration or his belated promises. That chapter of my life was closed. I walked into the hallway with each step a reaffirmation of my worth, the echoes of my shoes on the carpeted floor marking a path toward autonomy. The office lights brightened as I passed the glass walls where colleagues worked, unaware of the revolution that had just taken place inside that room. I felt the shift in the air, a new possibility humming beneath the corporate veneer, and I knew that nothing would ever be the same. Outside, in the chill of the morning, I inhaled deeply and released a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I had confronted the founder, challenged the family hierarchy, and emerged unbroken. The resignation letter, and the envelope that bore witness to every act of erasure, had done more than sever my ties. It had reclaimed my narrative. As I stepped into the elevator, I felt the solid hum of progress beneath my feet, certain that the next time I would walk through those doors, it would be as the founder of my own future, guided by merit, integrity, and the unshakable knowledge that I would never again be anyone's footnote. When I arrived at the office the next morning, the atmosphere was unrecognizable. The usual hum of hushed conversations and tapping keyboards had been replaced by hurried footsteps and urgent whispers behind closed doors. I felt the ripples of my resignation and evidence packet resonate through every floor of Trenton and Avery Media. Noelle from HR appeared at my desk within the first hour, her expression a mix of professional concern and barely concealed triumph. The evidence is damning, she said quietly, sliding a copy of an internal memo across the desk. The board convened last night and has already taken action. Bryce has been suspended pending further review. The single sentence felt like a detonator. The walls of nepotism and favoritism I'd been trapped behind were crumbling under the weight of cold, incontrovertible fact. Across the glass-walled corridors, I saw familiar faces looking at me with something akin to awe or relief. Colleagues who once avoided my eyes now offered tentative smiles, nodding as though I had finally vindicated all our unspoken frustrations. I felt a curious mixture of vindication and emptiness. The man who had built his career on my back was suddenly gone, at least for now, and I realized how deeply I'd internalized my role at Trenton and Avery as the uncredited strategist, the silent engine powering every notable success. Claire's name flashed on my phone at least 15 times before lunch. Each call went straight to voicemail. I didn't open her messages. I couldn't. Her silence during my struggle had spoken louder than any apology she might offer now. I needed space to breathe in the aftermath of our fractured marriage, to rediscover the part of me that existed beyond her family's expectations. That evening, I packed a single bag and headed to Brandon's apartment. His place was a sanctuary of familiarity. A modest living room stacked with legal textbooks, a couch that had seen more late-night strategy sessions than my own office, and the comforting aroma of fresh coffee always brewing. Brandon greeted me at the door, eyebrows raised but his greeting warm. "Thought you might need a reprieve," he said, guiding me inside. I sank onto the couch, feeling the weight of the past weeks lift slightly as the city's lights flickered through the window. We talked until dawn. About the injustice I'd endured, the board's swift action, and the twisting paths that had led me here. He reminded me I'd done more than expose a wrong. I'd set the stage for a future defined by merit rather than lineage. Each word he spoke felt like a stitch mending the frayed edges of my confidence. By the third morning, my phone buzzed with messages from clients I'd served for years. Personal notes of support, requests for meetings, hints that they were ready to follow me into whatever came next. One client rep wrote, "Your work changed our brand's trajectory. If you launch your own agency, count us in." Another executive said plainly, "We need your vision. Let us know when you're ready." The encouragement filled me with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since I first stepped through Trenton and Avery's revolving doors as an eager strategist. I realized that I wasn't starting from scratch. I was building on a foundation of trust and results that I had quietly cultivated. That afternoon, I registered Quiet North Strategies. The name felt right, a nod to the silent dedication that had driven me to excel and to the northern lights of possibility that awaited me beyond the corporate skyline. I filed the paperwork online while tethered to Brandon's Wi-Fi, my fingers typing out the founding documents with a deliberate steadiness. I drafted a mission statement to deliver data-driven, narrative-rich strategies that empower brands to connect authentically with their audiences. I created a simple logo, a compass pointing north over a still lake, then sent the first emails to potential partners and clients, attaching a concise one-page introduction to Quiet North services. In the days that followed, I converted a spare room in Brandon's apartment into a makeshift office. A desk salvaged from my old place, a whiteboard scrawled with campaign frameworks, and stacks of industry reports waiting to be dissected. As I assembled my first team, a talented designer I'd mentored and an analytics specialist who admired my methodology, I felt the familiar thrill of collaboration and creation. We brainstormed client outreach strategies, refined our service packages, and rehearsed our pitch deck until every slide felt like a natural extension of our collective expertise. Each step reminded me why I'd chosen this path, for the freedom to innovate, to own my voice, and to build a company where merit was the only currency that mattered. Late one evening, I stepped onto Brandon's balcony, phone in hand, and looked out over the city lights. I drafted a message to the Horizon Tech rep who had praised my last presentation, "Quiet North Strategies is live. I'd welcome the opportunity to discuss how we can accelerate your brand's growth." As I hit send, I felt a rush of possibility coursing through me. The board's scramble and Bryce's suspension were echoes of a past life. Now, every message, every meeting, and every strategy one crafted would carry my name and my reputation. No mask, no shadow, and no compromise. My heart thrummed with the silent promise of Quiet North's future, a testament to excellence guided not by family ties, but by the unwavering conviction that true worth is earned, not inherited. The email arrived mid-morning, its subject line so innocuous, request for meeting, that I almost deleted it. Instead, I paused, recalling the last few weeks, Bryce's suspension, Quiet North's registration, and the steady trickle of client inquiries. I opened it. Graham Avery wanted to meet to discuss recent developments. His tone was formal yet edged with urgency. I realized he was extending an olive branch, or perhaps throwing a lifeline. I arrived at Trenton and Avery's headquarters in tailored slacks and a crisp white shirt, the lobby's familiar hum muted by my determination. As I stepped off the elevator onto the boardroom floor, I felt the weight of the past settle into the polished wood underfoot. Graham waited behind the long table, flanked by the COO and two board members whose faces I recognized from behind glass during my departure. He stood when I entered, smoothing his jacket as if preparing for a performance. "Thank you for coming," he began, voice steady but betraying a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. "Regret, perhaps?" I nodded. He gestured to a chair opposite him. I sat. Papers lay before him, crisp and arranged. He tapped one, then met my eyes. "We've reviewed the evidence you presented," he said, "and we were wrong." His confession landed with surprising gravity. "The board and I would like to offer you the strategy director position, with an immediate salary increase and full equity participation." He paused, allowing the weight of the offer to settle between us. My heart thudded. Part of me felt vindication, recognition after years of obscurity. But another part recoiled at the memory of every late night I had spent while Bryce basked in unearned praise. I saw Talia's approving nod from the boardroom window, Claire's hopeful expression hovering at the threshold. I pictured Quiet North's logo on my laptop screen, the first client onboarding scheduled for next week. Accepting this offer would mean returning to the arena that had nearly broken me. I took a breath. "Thank you," I said, voice calm. "I appreciate the acknowledgement and the offer." I paused, choosing my words. But it's too late. My gaze met Graham's, steady. "I've already built something that reflects my values and my vision. Quiet North Strategies is my future." The board members exchanged glances. Graham's jaw tightened for a moment before he masked it with a nod. "I understand," he said quietly. I rose, smoothing my shirt. "I wish you and the company well." I stepped around the table and Graham offered his hand. I shook it firmly, neither resentment nor triumph in my grip, only resolve. As I turned toward the door, I felt a final severing of ties, cleaner than any resignation letter could enact. In the hallway, I paused and exhaled into the cool corridor. The offer had been tempting: power, prestige, approval, but I realized that my worth was no longer tied to a family name. I continued down the corridor, each step echoing with the certainty that I had made the right choice. Quiet North awaited, its future unbound by old loyalties and defined by the merit I had always carried within me. A year has passed since I stepped out of Trenton and Avery's revolving doors for the last time, and Quiet North Strategies now stands on solid ground, its foundation built from every lesson I learned the hard way. I walk into our modest office each morning with a sense of pride that feels nothing like the hollow excitement of inherited opportunity. Here, the air hums with creativity and purpose. Elise, our sharpest strategist, taps away at her laptop in the corner, poring over engagement data for a new consumer tech client. Our analytics director, Marcus, refines algorithms that predict audience behavior, and our designer, Lena, sketches wireframes for a brand campaign that promises to redefine market standards. I pause at the entrance, breathe in the scent of fresh coffee and optimism, and remind myself how far we've come. When I founded Quiet North, I imagined a company that valued merit above all else, where every idea rose on its own merits rather than on the pedigree of its author. I hired Elise first because her interview wasn't just about credentials, it was about the insight she offered into a hypothetical crisis communication scenario. She proposed a pivot so creative I still marvel at it now. We drafted her offer letter on the back of a napkin in a corner cafe, her eyes sparkling with the same drive that once fueled me under someone else's name. Now she leads client workshops, mentors interns, and challenges me every day to think bigger. Watching her grow reminds me of the strategist I once was and the leader I've become. Late last quarter, we closed our largest deal yet, a $500,000 engagement with NutriCore, a national health brand looking to overhaul its digital presence. I still recall the final presentation, our makeshift conference room transformed into a theater of strategy, with charts hand-drawn on easels and a dynamic slide deck that combined data visualization with immersive storytelling. When Ava Reyes, the CMO, declared that she had never seen such a comprehensive roadmap, I felt a thrill coursing through me that wasn't about personal glory, but about the collective effort of a team that had come together under a shared vision. We signed the contract that afternoon, the ink still drying on the dotted line as we toasted with sparkling water and the exhilaration of mutual respect. Meanwhile, word traveled fast through industry circles about the strategist who left a legacy firm and built something on his own terms. I heard that Bryce Larkin, whose suspension turned into a consulting gig shrouded in confidentiality, had resurfaced offering surface-level advice to small agencies. I imagined him pitching half-baked ideas without the depth of execution we prided ourselves on. I felt no satisfaction in his diminished stature, only relief that I no longer shared a byline with his empty promises. Quiet North's reputation grew by contrast. Our clients knew that when we said every detail accounted for, we truly meant it. Claire's voice lately echoes through different channels, a message forwarded by her sister, a tentative LinkedIn invite, an email titled, "Hope we can talk." Each one arrives with that familiar tug at my conscience, stirring memories of love and the promise of what could have been. But I don't reply. I learned that some bridges are meant to be left behind so new paths can flourish. My worth no longer depends on familial reconciliation. It rests in the satisfaction of forging my own legacy. On a warm afternoon in May, I stopped by our conference room window and watched our team collaborating on whiteboards, sticky notes clustered like colorful constellations. I felt a swell of gratitude for this space we created, a workspace not defined by titles foisted upon us, but by the ideas we chose to pursue. Quiet North had become a community of thinkers and doers who believed that impact arises from authenticity and hard work, not from who you happen to know. That evening, I returned to my apartment overlooking the city skyline, the lights below shimmering with possibility. I poured a glass of wine and opened my journal, where I'd recorded every milestone: the day we hired Elise, the moment we landed NutriCore, the morning I declined Graham's offer in favor of my own future. I closed the book and reflected on the journey, the betrayals, the resignations, the lonely nights of evidence gathering. And I realized that each hardship had been a stepping stone toward this moment of quiet triumph. My phone buzzed once more with a LinkedIn notification. Claire had endorsed my skills. I stared at her name, fingertips hovering over the screen, and then set the phone aside. I didn't need her validation. I had the proof of my own making. I stood by the window, sipping my wine, and watched as the city lights danced against the dark sky, a silent celebration of the company I built and the strategist I became, unseen no longer, defined only by the excellence I delivered and the integrity I upheld.